I started the night shift at Walmart a year ago. It was not my first choice of employment, but then I craved steady work, and the night shift did not seem so complicated as dealing with customers during the day. The pay was not as good as I would have preferred, but it kept me in bills, and the notion of an almost empty store was reassuringly comforting at first. No queues, no crowds, only me, a trolley full of boxes and empty shelves. The quiet, though, wasn't what I was expecting. When a structure is so big and nearly empty, it doesn't really feel peaceful. It feels hollow, as if sound can't travel the way it should. You can hear the hum of the lights, the air conditioning that kicks in, and occasionally sounds that don't have a source. I thought I'd get used to it after a while, but after months, I never really did. The first odd event happened in the toy section. It was 3 in the morning, and I was cutting open a box of action figures. Out of the blue, one of the dolls behind me spoke up. It was an electrically operated doll that speaks when you press a button. Only someone didn't press anything. I froze in shock at the toy, hoping it would shut up. The sound echoed down the empty aisle, lively but false. I ignored it and got back to work, although I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't by myself. Small occurrences like these kept happening. Toys would switch on and off, or I would return to a recently cleaned aisle to find boxes scattered all over the floor. Occasionally, I would get to hear the light footsteps, small and quick, as if a child was running down the tiles. Initially, I assumed it was my imagination, but the more frequent it happened, the more challenging it was to ignore. One of my coworkers, a guy who had been there for years, told me all about the store's history. He said that the Galveston Walmart was built where an orphanage had been leveled by the hurricane of 1900. There were hundreds of kids killed there, he said nonchalantly, like it was trivia. He teased about it, but even he didn't like being left alone on the toy side. He'd always come up with excuses for staying on the grocery side instead. I noticed more after that. One night, when I was sweeping, I left the toy aisle for a few minutes to grab more supplies. When I came back, my heart fell. There were footprints on the fresh wax, little ones, like a child, had tracked directly across the freshly mopped floor. They led you halfway down the aisle and just dropped dead. I was just there, staring, mop in hand, my chest closing up. No customers had been in the store, and none of my coworkers had feet that small. I tried to tell myself that it was a joke, but the longer I stayed, the less it seemed like it. Every now and then, when I was stocking shelves, I could hear faint whispers behind me. Too muddled to be heard, but loud enough to realize that it wasn't in my head. A couple of times I heard my name being quietly called out. The first time, I responded, yes, because I thought it was my manager, but when I turned around, no one was there. The strangest part was how the activity would vanish whenever there were greater than one persons involved. If I had a coworker with me, the store was normal. The aisles were aisles again. But the moment I was alone, it started. Toys rolling about, muffled laughter, the sense of being followed. The turning point happened one night in the section near the bike racks. I was loading boxes on a lower shelf when I felt someone step behind me. I turned around quickly, expecting another worker, but the aisle was empty. I resumed my work, trying to comfort myself, when I heard a low, high-pitched giggle. Unquestionably a child's, right behind me. My body froze. When I spun around, there was no one. Just rows of bikes all in a row, silent and still. I stayed on the job, though every sound made me jump. The wheels of the cart, squeaking, the hum of the lights, all of it was too loud, too jarring. My chest hurt from the thudding in my chest. Finally, I abandoned the cart and walked right out of the aisle. I didn't complete my shift that night. I told the manager I wasn't feeling well, and he let me go home early. I didn't mention the voices or the prints. I didn't want to be insane, but at home, I couldn't sleep. I just sat there in darkness, going over the toys flashing, the whispers, the small feet on the waxed floor. The more I thought about it, the more I knew it wasn't nerves or lack of sleep. Something was wrong with that store. Something lingered in it, something that did not want to be alone. And the truth was, I couldn't handle finding out what came next if I remained. A week later, I quit. I said it was the hours, but that wasn't what occurred. The thing is, every night I spent at that store felt heavy, as if the very air pressed down upon me, urging me to stay. I didn't want to keep watching. I didn't want to wait around for whatever was inside to come closer in. I left, and I never went back. I walked away, and I've never returned. I had been working at Walmart for about 8 months prior to anything unusual beyond bizarre occurrences starting to happen to me. Evenings were fairly routine, just refolding clothes, setting things back onto the shelves where customers had thrown them, and zonning the racks so that all the clothes were facing the correct direction. The clothing department was relaxed compared to the rest of the store, and since I usually worked the late-night shift, I'd sometimes have the section to myself. It was nice at first. It gave me room to work and concentrate without anyone bothering me. But the longer I stayed there, the more I noticed how differently the store is lived in the evening. Surrounded by an ocean of hundreds of racks and shelves and not being able to hear anyone else in it, the quiet sanctuary is anything but quiet. It's oppressive, as though the air surrounding you is weighing down on you. Every sound, the hanger creaking, the rustle of fabric. It was not unusual for people to be there shopping late at night, and sometimes people would begin to walk around in the store until the store closed. I just thought she was shopping. I figured I would walk over and see if she needed help finding something. So I folded the last shirt and stepped into the next aisle. When I got there, though, the woman had disappeared. The aisle was empty, and there wasn't even a cart in sight. I looked down the aisle to the end, hoping to see her turning around the corner, but there was no indication that anyone was moving. The piles of clothing stood still, and the floor lay still beneath the hum of fluorescent lighting. I dismissed it as perhaps she had walked off down another aisle, but a few minutes had passed, and then I caught sight of her again, this time in close view, wandering through the dresses. Same white long dress, same great height. She wasn't rolling a cart, nor was she holding anything. She merely wandered through the racks, slowly and silently. I took a pace towards her, but the moment I came around the corner, the place was once more empty. She seemed to have vanished into the clothes. My gut was tied in knots by this point, but I did not want to yield to fear. I went back to my table of t-shirts and tried to focus on the task at hand. However, I kept glancing up, hoping to catch sight of her again. The quiet was heavier than ever before, as if the store itself were gasping. It wasn't much longer until I heard it gentle humming. I had initially thought that it was the store's speaker system breaking down, but the sound was too close. It was low, persistent, a sort of lullaby. I stood there, shirt halfway folded in my hand, trying to hear. The humming became louder for a few seconds before it totally ceased. The subsequent silence was worse than the noise. I finally broke up the act and walked over to seek out another associate. I followed a fellow who was working in shoes and struck up a conversation with him by telling him, I thought I saw the lady walking in women's clothing without a cart. He glared at me for what seemed like forever before he said anything. Oh, you saw her, didn't you? When I asked him, he told me about the lady in white. Apparently, several employees had encountered her over the years, had a tendency to do when closing time arrived. She'd simply walk past the racks occasionally. Occasionally, she hummed. He'd even had patrons ask about the woman in the long dress on occasion, only to find out that employees knew no such individual had ever appeared at the store. Seeing him admit it was true made it even worse. If anything, worse than before. It simply did not mean I was mad. Something was actually happening in that area. I tried to just laugh it off, but after that night I steered clear of cutting women's garments as much as I possibly could. If I had to cut there, I'd do my work as quickly as I could and be gone. The image of that woman stayed with me, how her skirt seemed to drag along the floor, how she moved so quietly, and how she would always disappear whenever I moved too close. I never really saw her face, and maybe this is the thing that I find most disturbing. It is like she was not meant to be seen whole, but to be glimpsed only, just enough so you wonder. Even today, if I walk through a department store, I find myself glancing down the rows, hoping against hope to catch sight of her once more. And if ever I listen for far-off humming in an area where there ought not to be any, it tightens around my chest all over again. I don't know who the lady in white is or why she haunts this Walmart, but what I do know is this: if you ever see her, you'll never feel safe to be alone in that aisle anymore. The fluorescent lights hummed like a tired cloud of bees, the same droning whine I'd been hearing night after night for 8 months. I was restocking the cereal aisle for the umpteenth time because some pesky kid had knocked over 3 piles of Frosted Flakes and left them underfoot in broken boxes. The floor tiles were perpetually sticky underfoot here, despite how often the maintenance crew cleaned. I knelt to gather up the remnants of devastation, and the kneecap of my pant leg soaked through with something ice cold. Probably spilled milk from the dairy aisle leaking into the crevices. I wiped my hand on my apron and didn't think about it twice. Larry from electronics passed by, wheezing a bit like he always did after his 3rd energy drink of the day. "You see the new guy?" he said, pointing towards the break room. "Manager hired him yesterday. Doesn't talk." I hadn't, but that wasn't unusual. There was a lot of turnover, and half the night shift couldn't muster 2 words between them. Larry, however, stuck around, rubbing the back of his neck. "Something strange about him," he complained, but when I asked him to explain what, he shrugged and walked away. The PA system crackled, and Brenda's monotone voice gave the reminder of the clearance sale of patio furniture. My feet ached in my worn-out sneakers at midnight, and the store smelled like stale popcorn and bleach. I pushed my cart to the garden center, where the automatic doors swished open every few minutes for nothing. The motion sensors were temperamental, but tonight they were at their worst, turning on and off as if the person was just at the edge. I told myself it was most likely air currents or the system going haywire again. A cart passed by, the clanging of metal wheels turning. I hollered out, "Hey, do you need help back there?" Nothing. Just the hum of the freezers and the muted beep of a forklift reversing. I spotted the new hardware guy, standing stock still near the nail guns. A tall, broad-shouldered figure, with a knotted look that didn't change when I made noise to announce myself. His name tag was M. Voss. But the letters were beginning to peel at the corners. "You okay, man?" I asked. He blinked slowly, and next pulled out a box of screws, hanging onto it for a few minutes before putting it back. "Yeah," he said, finally, voice low and gravelly, finding my bearings. I nodded and headed off, but when I glanced over my shoulder from the far end of the aisle, he remained stock still, staring at the same spot. The break room was empty except for Brenda, who was heating up a foul-smelling burrito reeking of remorse. She did not look up when I sat down. "Boss creep you out too?" I hesitated. "He's just quiet." Brenda snorted. "Quiet ain't the word. He was in the office with Jeff yesterday, and Jeff emerged with a look on his face of horror. Guy makes the room feel weird." I was too stunned to answer, so I nodded. The microwave beeped. The wall clock read 1:17 a.m., my half-time. Or once more, I caught myself looking at the security monitors more times than I ought to have. The lenses were blurry, the photographs terrible, but I could spot the glacial movement of Voss coasting through sporting goods. He seemed to follow the same few aisles over and over, not picking up anything. When I descended to scout myself, I didn't spot him. Larry was restacking fishing equipment, whistling flatly. "You see, Voss?" I asked. Larry frowned. An hour ago, he punched out. I pulled out the time cards. No punch-out. Just his name, still indicating clocked in. The freezers started malfunctioning after that. Temperature alarms sounded continuously, but if I listened, the readings were fine. Cold air blew into the dairy aisle and made me get goosebumps on my arms. I zipped my sweatshirt and talked myself into thinking it was just the AC venting too heavily. Then I heard a scraping noise, like a cart wheeled slowly across tile. It was in the back, near the compactors. I followed it, my sneakers squealing. The noise stopped. The compactors were motionless, the dumpster bare, but the concrete was damp, dark smudges spreading from the drain. There was a hint of metal in the air. I saw Voss in the staff restroom, washing his hands for what felt like too long. Water ran full force, and his hands were a reddish color, like he'd washed them raw. He didn't look at me in the mirror. "You okay?" I said. He turned off the water. "Yeah." He dried his hands on paper towels, crumpled them up, and walked by without saying anything more. My stomach tightened for reasons I couldn't understand. I let Jeff know I was taking my break already. He hardly glanced up at the schedule. "Fine, just don't ghost me like Voss." He grumbled. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands wrapped around the wheel. The parking lot was half full, the sodium lights giving everything a sick orange color. My phone read 3:42 a.m. I should have been restocking paper towels. Instead, I looked at the back door near the compactors. It swung open once, opened slowly, then shut again. I kept telling myself that it was the wind, but my instincts told me otherwise. The next night, I phoned in sick. Brenda texted at 1 a.m. "Voss no-showed? Jeff's apoplectic." I did not reply. I worked from home and watched awful television, wincing each time the refrigerator hummed. I quit 2 days after that. Jeff didn't even complain. Just signed the form and said, "Yeah, probably best." Larry messaged me that weekend. They hired another new guy. I did not respond. I still drive past the Walmart sometimes, late at night, when the parking lot's nearly deserted. The lights are always too bright, the automatic doors opening and closing on no one. I never look too hard. It was late fall, a little after 9 p.m., and I had to run into a Walmart near my apartment to grab a few things for the week. The parking lot was basically empty except for a few cars scattered about. I parked by the door and headed in, not thinking twice about it. Inside the store it was eerily quiet, no music playing, just the gentle hum of the lights overhead. I was browsing the home goods section when I noticed a guy, about my dad's age, just standing at the end of the aisle. He wasn't shopping or anything, just standing looking in my general direction. I brushed it off at first and figured he was waiting for someone. But when I headed into another aisle, there he was again, this time pretending to browse towels. I kept shopping, he kept appearing. He would casually stroll by me at times. At others he would pause just outside the range of my peripheral vision. He never touched a thing. What was creepy was that whenever one of the store employees would approach, he would vanish, only to reappear a few aisles away. I ducked into the cleaning supplies aisle, hoping he wouldn't come in after me. He didn't. What I did hear was the squeak of his shoes back and forth at the mouth of the aisle, as if waiting for me to come out. My heart started racing. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, pretending to text someone. But really I was trying to make it look like I wasn't by myself. When I finally made my way to the grocery part of the store, I saw him again, closer now than before, too close. He was still pushing a cart around, but this one was empty and he still hadn't put anything in it. The way he was looking at me wasn't the look of a shopper. It was calculating, watching. I headed to the checkout even though I hadn't gotten everything I'd gone for. As she rang up my items, I caught a glimpse of him out of the side of my eye. He'd stopped a few registers over, behind a woman with a full cart, but he wasn't buying anything for himself. He was waiting, watching. When I left the store, there he was again immediately, a few feet behind me, pushing that same empty cart in the direction of the doors, as though he had no other reason to be there except to leave when I left. The parking lot suddenly felt huge and empty, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. I hurried to my car, jingling my keys. I got inside as fast as I could, locked the doors, and started the engine. That's when I noticed him again. He wasn't going to a car. He wasn't even looking for one. He was just standing in the row across from mine, staring directly at me across the dark parking lot. I didn't wait to find out what was going to happen next. I pulled straight out of the lot and onto the main road. I watched in my rearview mirror as he walked back towards the store entrance, still cartless, still groceryless, still explanationless. To this day, I have no idea what he had in mind. But this I do know. If I hadn't trusted my gut and gotten out of there, if I'd stayed even a few minutes longer, I might not have made it home that night.